My session is really about the regulators. I have not one, not two, but three regulators. We're told in the morning, mambo ni matatu. And so I have three economists. Three regulators, and they're all economists. So what I would like to do, because a lot of the questions that we had, and we had discussed this earlier, they came up through some of the discussions that we had. So I would like this to be very interactive. Please be very kind to one of the regulators in particular. I will not mention which one. But there's one in particular I have seen people looking at. Please be kind to that particular one. And then let me do a quick, can I introduce you or you want to introduce yourselves? You'll be modest, won't you? Permit me to just read the... Okay, I'll just read the proper, very briefly, very quickly, starting with the panel because of protocol. It doesn't... Okay, there, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with Polly. Polly has over 16 years experience in taxation at KRA. I said she was an economist. Okay, so I won't tell you where she went to school, but she did economics. She's involved in the tax legislation process through identification and review of the legislative amendment proposals, review of draft legislations from internal and external stakeholders, and in the budget proposal process. Okay, that's the bit that I'm going to read. And then you'll see why it's relevant in the next session. Then Justus, I suppose you need an introduction if I have to. Justus, again, an economist. I know it's the last session, guys, but let's try. See, I'm also moving around so that I can stay active like you. So Justus experienced capital markets. He has 19 years experience in capital markets research and strategy. His background is in research as well. Again, very relevant to what we'll be discussing. Financial markets, strategy, climate finance, and product development. Mr. Apiyo, last but definitely not least, senior, yes. Yeah, thank you. Economist, senior economist with the Retirement Benefits Authority, the regulator of the pension industry in Kenya. I think that's the brief. I think 16 years as well. Oh, 50. Okay, I've given you to the end of the year. There was a question that was asked. It came up, everyone, whenever you talk about REITs, the first thing everyone says is tax. It's fantastic for tax. But it's fantastic for who? For the investor, for the promoter, or for the promoter? Or for the REIT itself. So starting with, because of protocol, Polly, if you can just do the basics, because there's some people who may not be too familiar with what the actual benefits, tax benefits are for a REIT. And we'll look at it from the promoter of the REIT, so the REIT itself, not the investors, because we'll come to that a bit later.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm that person, Gary. Yeah. So there are some incentives that we do give to REITs. They are in the law. We implement the law as it is. So maybe that's why KRA is always on the, yeah. So we are implementers of the law. So for REITs, they are exempt from income tax, and I think that has been talked about by different speakers. They are also exempt from VAT when they transfer, when they are assets, and also the transactions that come with those transfer. They are exempt from VAT. And then there is an elephant or room, the stamp duty, which lapsed December 2022. And I guess you are looking at KRA and saying, what is KRA then doing about that? The PS talk about they are engaging the National Treasury, and that is a body that should be engaged of the exemption from, because KRA, what, so if the exemption is not there, we come in and collect. That's basically what we do. If tomorrow the law changes that REITs are subject to income tax, we are there collecting. So yeah, that's our role. Yeah.
Thank you, Polly. And on that, isn't it automatic? Because it used to be automatic. That if I come to market, I just need to go to CMA. If CMA has registered me as REIT status, then I get the tax exemption. But is that still the case, or do I now have to come to KRA in addition to going to my primary regulator?
Yeah, that's a good question, Brian. For REITs to enjoy the tax benefits, they have to be registered with the commissioner. For REITs and the investee companies, not LLPs. Yeah, so they have to be registered with the commissioner to get the benefit of the tax.
So, I mean, there's a number of people who've talked about the tax certainty, the regulatory certainty. Polly has mentioned the exemption that investee companies and the REITs themselves have from, I think, CGT in particular, which is, I want to segue to you. For life, this is not in the insurance sector. I think for properties or promoters who have life insurance, when they transfer their properties, they don't get hit by capital gains like everyone else does. But you don't see too many. I think we only have one REIT that is in the insurance sector. So why is it that even though you've given them the benefit of, there's that tax exemption that's there. There were some statistics we were told earlier, I think 1.6 or 7 trillion in your industry, but REITs only account for 6. So you have the benefit of not being charged with CGT. Why are we not seeing more uptake in the pension industry, particularly for REITs?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. And because we as regulators, we do the Lord's work. That's so you seated there, I know you'll expect that by the time you are retiring, you get your pension. So that's why we have to be very keen in terms of the investments that pension funds get into. As you mentioned, yes, the pension industry currently is 1.7 trillion. And the 1.7 trillion is invested in different asset classes, over 15 asset classes, REITs being one of them. And for that matter, REITs takes up to 30%. 30% of 1.7 trillion. That's around 510 billion. But guess what? It's only 10.6 billion that has already been invested by pension funds. So as a regulator, I can sit back and say we've done our part. We've given you the provision of up to 510 billion. Actually, we've overachieved the 2033 ISO 2033 goal of moving the rates to 440 billion. So as we are already beyond your goal of 2033. So we've already provided that provision of up to 510 billion, but only 10.6 billion. But I know as we move on, I'll explain why this is not taking up and what we can do maybe moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. But just on that, and it's good you've mentioned the 30% limit, because previously you could only do, it was only listed REITs that pension funds could invest in up to that limit. There was a lot of lobbying from RAK, from the industry players, and this was now opened to not just listed, but listed and unlisted. But then, as you say, you still haven't seen an uptick. So you've increased this, you have more, actually have more unlisted REITs in the country than the listed ones. So why hasn't it also then translated?
Yes, in 2015 we changed the regulations to accept or to include listed REITs into the investment guidelines, and that one we gave a provision of up to 30%. Then again, I saw there was a proposal, especially I think it was from RAK, where they wanted the unlisted REITs also to be included, and that proposal came in 2021, and it went through the budget memorandum process, and it was accepted. So currently, it is both listed and unlisted. But still, even without the unlisted being accepted within the investment guidelines, we still have a window of up to 15% where you can bring in any other asset. And that's how the Econ REITs came in. And then now we regularize it so that it can get into the unlisted platform. But I think you've heard from the other panelists who are here, and you heard the fight between trustees and fund managers, where fund managers are saying that the trustees don't have the qualification to make decisions, and then the fund managers are also saying that the trustees are not paying enough to make them sweat. So as a regulator, we have to balance the two, because we know the trustees have the personal responsibility. they act in trust for the members. And it's like you are acting and there's a noose over your neck. So you have to be very careful because the members will come for you and also the regulator will come for you. So I think what needs to be done is, number one, is in terms of awareness creation and also public education, which had been mentioned here before. You see, if you don't make trustees to understand REITs, then what was said by the other panelists is that try to speak in Kiswahili. So the financial experts have always been accused of kizungu mingi. Yeah, so so what we can say in Kiswahili that punguza kizungu, so that the trustees, they can be able to understand what REITs are, and through that they can be able to invest or to give okay to the fund managers to invest in REITs. So that's one of the challenges that has been seen. And then also you see, and this was also alluded to in terms of the other assets that are available in the market. You see, this is the same capital that is also being looked at by the other 15 asset classes. And over the years, we've seen that most of the pension funds capital have moved to around 95% are in 4 asset classes. And these are the property, this is the quoted equities, government securities taking the bigger chunk at around 46%, and then the guaranteed funds. So these 4 asset classes are the ones that have taken the bigger chunk. But there's now a push for diversification so that the scheme assets can also move to the other asset classes. So I think with public education and awareness, this will grow up. And also, there's also the other issue of building the trust. It was talked about. Without the trust, then it means the trustees won't have that confidence in terms of investing in this other. So the governance issues have to be right. And then number 3, bring more REITs also so that we can have a variety where trustees can choose from. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a panelist who said 2 panels ago about having to meet pension trustees. When I look around the room, some of the service providers that I've been fortunate to work with, we've had to do the rounds, whether it is trustees, whether it is some of the regulators, whether it is, and it was encouraging to hear that even REIT is doing the same thing with Congress constantly, which means we'll have to keep doing the rounds, we'll have to keep singing about the REITs and the benefits and so on. Just we come to you, I think, the most, and every REIT comes to CMA the most. You're the one that sits in the middle, even with all this policy, wish list that the REIT society, the REIT association wants. It all comes to you. In the morning, we were told about some of the reforms that are coming to the regulations. We had a discussion earlier. It was a very, very nice and heated, if I can call it, discussion. I wish Justus can repeat some of the amazing things that he was telling us when we were having this. I had asked him about the regulations. As you know, they came in 2013. We have the Statutory Instruments Act that says regulation every 10 years. Of course, to be alive to market. So as you answer this, maybe you can start with saying, are we, the full regulations themselves, not the bit on the professional investor, are we going to get those done? And then now you can walk us through some of the reforms that you're bringing to the market.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian, and thanks, audience, for listening to us, even as we do a bit of coverage of what REITs are. For those who don't understand REITs, I would wish to give an example of an orange. If you have a big orange and perhaps you can't sell it to other people for a reason that it's too expensive, you can split it into big pieces. And then once you split it into pieces, then the price will come down. So the moment the price comes down, then it's more affordable and it's transferable to other parties. And that is all that we are trying to do here. Of course, this has to happen under some surveillance, under some referee, and that is why CMA comes in. Given that this has to be put through a professional approach, that's why we say we have trustees, we have managers, we have all those parties that you heard about in the morning, who are supposed to ensure that they oversight the process so that whatever comes at the end is a product that people can have confidence in. That's the ultimate objective. Now, So for a market, I think in terms of conditions, and going back to the orange example I gave, there are a number of provisions we have in the current regulations. One, you require a minimum capital of 100 million shillings to do a D-REIT or a development REIT. And you also require a minimum of 300 million shillings to do an I-REIT as initial net asset value of your capital. Second point, you require a minimum of 7 investors in both cases, be it D-REITs or I-REITs as a precondition. And also, if you want leverage for an I-REIT, there are certain conditions around you having room of 35% of what you can be able to borrow from the market for you to progress your projects. You can advance that to around 40%, subject to it being limited to 6 months. For D-REIT, it's a bit high. It's around 60% leverage, which can be extended to around 75% within the period of 6 months. It's important to observe this because then it helps you to understand how all this works. Because what we are trying to do is to ensure that this product goes across to the rest of the market as easily as possible. And there was an indication in the morning that we now have reduced, if you want to invest in these instruments, and you're going to do either a D-REIT or a restricted I-REIT, the minimum amount that you're going to put in is 100,000 shillings. In the past, it was 5 million shillings, and there was a lot of hue and cry that the amount is too high for some of these interested parties to get into it. Now, coming back to the question you asked around reform of regulation, we do that on a phased approach. We already have a poll that is out. We are aware that for some of these instruments, regulations have been overtaken by events, and as a regulator, we have to be agile. So there is a program to do a review of all those regulations, and communication will be coming out as to when all this will be happening. And when and if it happens, of course, there is an exposure we usually have of a period for you to provide the comments and indicate which areas should be amended for the benefit of the market. I have to add here that, you see, this is your market. That is what we need to understand. The regulator is there to facilitate you. Of course, talking with KRA here through National Treasury and RBA also. Ultimately, it's important to get into a regulated space because then, of course, you can't have a 100% guarantee, but you have some level of comfort that you're investing in a product that is oversighted. Otherwise, a lot of times when you burn your fingers and the regulator is not in the know, that's when you get to know that, but there was CMA, which is sometimes very unfortunate. I don't know whether South Africa has also gone through a similar experience, but, especially with social media, it's very for somebody to generate some information, whether true or not, and before you know it, the regulator has been karanguad properly, So it's important for us to, as much as possible, operate within regulated space.
What Justus has not mentioned, when we had this discussion, he had a very he finished off with a very loyally rider that, just so you know, in the Finance Act, the requirement to update regulations every 10 years was done away with. But we are going to do. We are going to do it. But just so you know, that was removed. Now, the question of tax, I think, the certainty, I think it was Lydia who mentioned this. This is a huge, huge issue, especially for issuers and for investors. I know, as she mentioned, there's a number of providers who are just sitting on the the waiting line, waiting to see what will be done. Policy says KRA is not there to do policy, KRA just implements. Now, since you sit in the driver's seat effectively, it is you as the capital markets that everyone will run to and say, what can we do about stamp duty? What can we do about CGT? How do you then cascade it so that you're reading from the same page with KRA? Because we'll come to you, you'll give us a license, you'll give us the authorization, we'll explain, you agree, but then we go to KRA and it's a completely different, So how do we manage this?
Okay, maybe I can take you a bit through the process of making amendments to any laws, whether tax or otherwise. I think the starting point is to get feedback because, as I said, we are facilitators. Ours is to relay the information as provided and communicate it to the authorities. Of course, we are part of government. But again, being a facilitator is to pick up the information and provide advisory to National Treasury on what needs to be done. So how it happens is on an annual basis, we have roundtable conversations around some of the issues that the market is concerned about. And in that conversation, usually, we send out letters to collect views on what are the most current issues that require redress from government. And out of that collection of those views, then we convene a roundtable, similar to the session we're having here. And then the issues are sieved and then discussed and a way forward provided. Now, that is converted into a policy proposal that is sent to National Treasury for consideration. Now, I have to add here that we have no say on exactly what National Treasury is going to say because, again, there are other considerations around how much they want on revenue, what exemptions they want to give, and which ones they want not to give. And that's why, for example, the Stamp Duty Act issue got its way into being removed. We just got to know it just like anybody else. And that's what sometimes happens to your parent. As a child, sometimes you request for certain things, right? And it's for the parent to decide what to give you and what not to give you, okay? So yours is to continue appealing to the parent and telling them, this is important, I think I should get this sweet, right? Yeah, so it's similar to what you go through. So once we have submitted the same, National Treasury, of course, sits and together with Parliament, they make... Sometimes, National Treasury and Parliament can have differing views on certain things. And therefore, so they have to sit also to have a convergence of those views and ultimately provide advisory to CMA, which then is what the market consumes at the end of it all as the view of government. Now, in terms of getting feedback, everything doesn't have to is that roundtable I talked about things to happen. Sometimes we can make submissions even in between the year, and we would want to encourage. Of course, for something like stamp duty, the discussion is still ongoing. But for others that, there are thoughts around, if something new, for example, emerges, it's important to put it up and then we see how can we further it so that the discussion goes through the same process and then ultimately we get that feedback from National Treasury. Our prayer is that a lot of what needs to be done will be done over time, despite some of the challenges we have seen, and uptake will improve. Subject to, again, the parent listening to us as often as possible when and if we provide that advisory.
When I look at this panel, because as I said, the common theme other than the economics is you all have a background in policy, in research and so on. So you know the dynamics of the market, you look around, you see what's happening around. I remember, I think when we were doing one of the aggregator vehicles with RAK of having to try and convince CMA to give several of these concessions. The one that I would like, I know this is your personal view because you can't bind the authority. Investee vehicles. Why does the regulator only define this to be companies only? Yet you have LLPs, which are just as similar. You have the aggregator vehicles that we've been talking about, which some REITs can use to bring in, to crowd in retail investors. But KRA has a very narrow view of what an investee vehicle or a REIT is. So, do we have a friend in the KRA who can also speak on our behalf, even as we lobby? Or do you not see these as matters which...
I feel you. But we are implementers, like you said. When we say investee companies, it's limited. We call it narrow, but you call it as it is. It's investee companies. You come with LLP, want an exemption, unfortunately, we are bound. We define rates in our act, in the Income Tax Act. We take the definition of rates from Capital Act. From their act, that's what we take as a rate. So they're the ones now who define what rates are and who qualifies for the tax benefit. And then on the regulations, which they may or may not review, my appeal to CMA, bring them to KRA because there are some things you've noted that you also would like to have an input on regulations.
You can see Polly is now all eyes on me.
I think the way you interpret the regulations, Carrie interprets them,
Yeah,
sometimes is...
But as right of reply, my thinking is, yes, the definition is taken out from what the Act indicates, but then again, we rely on you to provide that feedback. For example, on LLPs. If there's a submission that perhaps there needs to be an expansion of those that should be considered to include, to not only focus on companies, but also include LLPs, we will submit that proposal to National Treasury, and if there's a justification, because, see, again, it is important for that explanation to be very clear when that submission is brought to CMA. Otherwise, if we fully don't understand what's going on, you can imagine when we go to have a conversation with your about something, they'll say, well, we've heard you, but we just don't understand what you're saying. So it's important in writing to have it very clearly explained so that ultimately, once that explanation is coming through, it will be easier for them to give, that